How are you guys doing? Today is Tuesday, May 17th, 2022. I'm James Sims, and for this episode of The Elite, I'm going to preview the conference final round of the 2022 NBA playoffs to finish off the 2021-22 season. There are 4 teams left out of the original 30, and in order to preview this round, I'm going to have to review the previous rounds to give you a sense of how these 4 teams got here. And of course, once this is all done, I'm going to lay it out the championship path for the team that won it all the way through. But with that said, without further ado, just taking a look at the teams that are playing, as the first matchup is going to be today. The Eastern Conference Finals is going to feature the 1 and 2 seeds from the Eastern Conference, the Miami Heat and the Boston Celtics. In the West, the Western Conference Finals is going to feature the Golden State Warriors, the 3 seed from the West, and the Dallas Mavericks, the 4 seed from the Western Conference. But first, taking a look at the Eastern Conference Finals, because the Eastern Conference Finals is getting started today. Looking first at how the Boston Celtics were able to make their trip all the way here. The Celtics would go on to win in their first series against the Brooklyn Nets. They would go on to sweep the Brooklyn Nets in that series, as Jason Tatum would lead the team in scoring, as he would average 29.5 points per game, 4.5 rebounds, 7.3 assists, and 1.8 steals. Their shooting guard, Jaylen Brown, would average 22.5 points, 5.5 rebounds, 4 assists, 2.5 steals as well. Marcus Smart, the Defensive Player of the Year this year, would average 16.5 points, 7 assists as well. Al Horford, their center, who won back-to-back college championships at Florida, would finish with averaging 13 points and 7.5 rebounds for the 4 games he played. And Grant Williams, off the bench, would go on to average 11, as the Celtics would have 5 players averaging double digits. And taking a look at how those individual matchups would fare for Boston, the first 2 matchups they won at home. They would win the first one by 1. They won game 2 by 7. In Boston, they would win game 3 by 6. And then in the clinching game, they would go on to beat the Brooklyn Nets by 4. In that clinching game, they will go on to outscore the Nets by combined 8 in those middle 2 quarters. They were led in that game by Jason Tatum, their elite starting small forward out of Duke. He would finish with 29 points and 5 assists in the 36 minutes he played. Jaylen Brown finished with 22 points and 8 rebounds. And then Marcus Smart finished with 20 points, 5 rebounds, and 11 assists in that clinching game. So that is, of course, how the Boston Celtics would make it through that first round. Once they made it to the second round, they would face off against the defending NBA champs, the Milwaukee Bucks, as they would be the team to dethrone the champs. In this second round, they would go on to take the Milwaukee Bucks to 7 games, as they would lose game 1 at home by 12. They would win game 2 in Boston by 23, sending it to Milwaukee. They would lose game 2 in Milwaukee by 5 as they trailed 2-1. They would beat Milwaukee in Milwaukee for game 4 by 8 to even it up at 2. They would lose game 3 in Boston by 3, and they would go on to win game 6 and 7. They won game 6 by 13. They would win the clinching game 109-81. They won it by 28 games, as they would be led in scoring in this matchup by Grant Williams, their power forward, as he had 27 points and 6 rebounds in this game. Their elite small forward out of Duke, Jason Tatum, finished with 23 points and 8 assists in this matchup. This would be a very big game for the Celtics, as this would be because the Bucks have actually knocked the Celtics out a good amount in order to get to where they got, and the Bucks were the reigning champs. So this is a very big win for the Boston Celtics, as they had to knock off 2 very tough opponents in order to make it here into this matchup. Taking a look at how their opponents, the Miami Heat, got here, they would finish with the best record in the Eastern Conference with just 2 more wins than the Boston Celtics. So they would face off in the first round against the Atlanta Hawks after the Atlanta Hawks had to win 2 play-in games in order to make it there. In this first series against the Atlanta Hawks, they would go on to win the first 2 games in Miami. They won game 1 by 24, and they would go on to win game 2 by 10. They would lose their only matchup in the first round in game 3 in Atlanta by 1. They would win game 4 in Atlanta by 24, and then in the clinching game in game 5 in Miami, they would beat the Hawks by 3, 97-94. In this clinching game, they would outscore the Hawks by 13 in the second, which would be the difference, and they would be led in scoring by their starting shooting guard, Victor Oladipo. He finished with 23 points and 3 steals. Bam Adebayo, their center out of Kentucky, finished with 20 points and 11 rebounds. So that is, of course, how they would make it through that round. In this particular series, they would be led in scoring average by their elite starting wing, Jimmy Butler. He would average 30.5 games in the 4 games he played, as he averaged 7.8 rebounds, not to mention that he would also average 5.3 assists and 2.8 steals per game. Max Strus would average 14 points as he started all 5 games. Tyler Hero started none of the 5 games, but he would average double digits as well. He averaged 12.8 points. Bam Adebayo will be the 4th player on the Heat averaging double digits. He had 12.4 points per game for this series. But following this series where they would beat the Atlanta Hawks in 5, they would go on to the next round where they would face off against the 4-seed Philadelphia 76ers, the team that I thought would probably be the most formidable, but coming off of their series in which they would go 7 with the Raptors and Joel Embiid would get his face broken, the advantage would kind of lean towards the Miami Heat. But of course, I'm not creating excuses. I'm providing context. In this series, they would go on to win the first 2 games in Miami. They won game 1 by 14. They won game 6 by 16. Games 3 and 4, they would lose in Philly. They lost by 20 in game 3, and they would lose by 8 in game 4 after the series was tied at 2. The Heat will go on to win game 3 in Philadelphia. As that matchup, they will go on to win by 35. That would be the defining game in this matchup. And they will go on to win and clinch their spot into the Eastern Conference Finals after beating the Philadelphia 76ers in Game 6 in Philadelphia. In this game, they were led in scoring by their elite starting small forward, the former Philadelphia 76er, Jimmy Butler. Butler finished with 32 points, 8 rebounds, 4 assists, and 2 blocks in this game. And then Max Strus, their shooting guard, would finish with 20 points and 11 rebounds alongside 5 assists. In this 6-game series, they would, of course, be led in scoring in this matchup by Jimmy Butler. Their elite starting small forward would be one of 5 players averaging double digits. He averaged 27.5 points. He averaged 7.5 rebounds. He averaged 5.5 assists as well. 1.7 steals for the series. Bam Adebayo, their second leading scorer, averaged 16.5 points and 7.5 rebounds. Their third leading scorer was Tyler Hero off the bench, who averaged 14.7 points. Their fourth leading scorer, Max Strus, averaged 11 points as he started all 6. And then their fifth leading scorer, Victor Oladipo, did not start a single game as he would go on to average 10.3 points himself. And that is how Miami would clinch their way through, as Miami and Boston is, of course, a matchup that was eventually bound to happen, as these two teams have incredible coaching, incredible systems, and of course incredible depth through and through. These are the two teams from the Eastern Conference that will have to go through one another if they want to make it to the NBA Finals. And of course, these are, like I said, these are the two teams that earned it. That is what the Eastern Conference Finals is looking like. Taking a look at what the Western Conference Finals is going to look like starting tomorrow. The 3 seed in the West, Golden State Warriors, are going to host the 4 seed Dallas Mavericks. The Warriors have the home court advantage after finishing with just one more win than the Dallas Mavericks. Looking first at how the Dallas Mavericks were able to make it to this round, the Dallas Mavericks would win in their first series versus the Utah Jazz. They would win that series in 6 games. At home, they would actually lose to the Jazz in game 1 and by 6. They would win game 2 at home in front of their fans by 6 points, as for the first couple games they were missing Luka Doncic. They would win game 3 in Salt Lake City by 8 points. The Jazz would tie up the series in game 2 after they beat the Mavs by 6. They would beat the Mavs by 1 in game 4. I'm looking at the wrong game. They would go on to beat the Jazz in Dallas by 25 in game 5 to take the full advantage. And then in the clinching game in game 6, the Dallas Mavericks would beat the Jazz 98-96 in Salt Lake City. In this final game, they were led in scoring by Jalen Brunson and Luka Doncic, as both players at 24 points. Doncic was able to add 9 rebounds, 8 assists, 2 steals, and 2 blocks. Jalen Brunson had 2 steals along with his 24 points as well. And following this first series, they would clinch their way into the second round. And in this series they just played, they will go on to beat the 1 seed Phoenix Suns in a series in which I would believe they shocked a good amount of people. They would go on to beat the Suns in 7 games. They would go on, but before I get into the Suns series, looking back at the Jazz series, they would be led in scoring in that series by Jalen Brunson. Jalen Brunson would average 27.8 points per game in the 6 games he started. Luka Doncic was the only other 20-point per game scorer, as he only started 3 of the games. He averaged 29 points, 10.7 rebounds, and nearly 6 assists, as he also averaged at least a steal and a block for the series. He was the only player to do that for the Mavericks. Within this matchup, Spencer Dinwiddie would average 15 points a game as he started 3 of the 6. Dorian Finney-Smith averaged 13 points and 6 rebounds. Reggie Bullock, their 5th leading scorer, averaged 10.7 points, 6 rebounds, and over a steal a game. Their 6th leading scorer, Maxi Kleber, averaged 10.3 points and 5 rebounds as he started none of the 6, as the Dallas Mavericks had 6 double-digit scores to help make it through to the second round. In the second round, they would go on to defeat the 1 seed Phoenix Suns, as they would actually lose the first 2 games in Phoenix. They lost game 1 by 7. They lost game 2 by 20. They would win games 3 and 4 in Dallas, as they won game 3 by 9 and they won game 4 by 10. In game 5 in Phoenix, they would lose by 30. They would win game 6 in Dallas by 27, and then they would go on to win the clinching game. They won game 7 in Phoenix by 33 points. They won it 123-90 in this matchup. They would outscore the Suns by 10 in the first, by 20 in the second. They were up by 30 at halftime. In this clinching matchup, they were led in scoring by their elite starting shooting guard out of Slovenia, Luka Doncic. Doncic would finish with 35 points, 10 rebounds, 4 assists, and 2 steals in 30 minutes. Then their point guard off the bench, Spencer Dinwiddie, would finish with 30 points as well in the 25 minutes he played. Jalen Brunson, their starting point guard, had 24 points and 6 rebounds. And taking a look at how the Mavericks would look at how their scoring would amount in this series, they were, of course, led in scoring by Doncic. Doncic averaged 32.6 points per game this series. He would average 9.9 rebounds, nearly averaging a double-double. He averaged 7 assists and 2 steals a game in the 7 games he started. Jalen Brunson, their second leading scorer, averaged 18.7 points and over a steal a game in the 25 games, or in the 7 games he started. Spencer Dinwiddie, their player off the bench, their leading scorer off the bench, averaged 11 points as he played all 7. Dorian Finney-Smith, their 4th leading scorer, averaged 10.3 points as there were 4 players that averaged at least double digits. Dorian Finney-Smith and Reggie Bullock both averaged Reggie Bullock and Maxi Kleber averaged 9.9. If you round those up, they had 6 players that averaged virtually 10 points for the series, as that would be a big part of the reason why the Dallas Mavericks were able to make it here. As, of course, while Luka Doncic has played incredibly well, they were also able to see scoring coming in from different angles, which is always good when we're talking about a game where you have 5 players on a court. And then taking a look at who the Mavericks are going to be facing off against, they're going to be facing off against a very strong Golden State Warriors team, as this Golden State Warriors team enters this matchup with, of course, having finished with 1 more win in the regular season than the Dallas Mavericks, and they would, of course, they made it through 2 teams in order to make it here. In their first series, they would go on to beat the 6th seed Denver Nuggets, as they were led by this year's MVP Nikola Jokic. The Warriors would win games 1 and 2 in San Francisco. They won game 1 by 16, and they won game 2 by 20. They won game 3 in Denver by 5. 5 to, of course, put themselves virtually in the driver's seat. The only game they lost in that series was Game 4, and they only lost that game by 5. They would win the series clinching Game 5 in Golden State, in San Francisco, as they would outscore the Nuggets by 12 points in the fourth quarter to do so. In Game 5, they would be led in scoring by their goated starting point guard, the NBA's all-time leading scorer, or the all-time leading three-point scorer, Stephen Curry. He would finish with 30 points, 5 rebounds, 5 assists, 2 steals, and 5 blocks within this game itself, as he also made 5 threes in order to help the Warriors win. In this series, the Warriors would be led in scoring by Stephen Curry, as he would start only one of the 5 games. He would still average 28 points, 3.4 rebounds, 5.4 assists, and 1.6 steals a game. And then additionally, their second leading scorer was their elite starting shooting guard, Klay Thompson, as he averaged 22.6 points, just under 4 rebounds, a steal or an assist and a half a game, and just over a steal per game as well. Their third leading scorer, Jordan Poole, would average 21 points in the 5 games he started, as he also averaged 5 assists and over a steal. The Warriors had 3 players that were averaging 20 points per game in that first series. And then their fourth leading scorer, Andrew Wiggins, out of Kansas, would average 14 points, as he also added 7 rebounds, and he also averaged a steal per game in those 5 games he played, as the Golden State Warriors they pretty much eased their way past the Nuggets, led by the MVP this season. Going into the second round, they would face off against the 2-seed Memphis Grizzlies after the Grizzlies had won their first playoff series as a young core. They won their series against the Minnesota Timberwolves, if I'm not mistaken. But in this series, the Warriors would go on to beat the Grizzlies in 6 games, as they would go on to win Game 1 in Memphis by 1, as Memphis had the home court advantage. They would go on to lose Game 2 at Memphis in 5, so of course the series was tied at 1. They would win Game 3 by 30 games on their home court in Golden State, and they would go on to beat the Grizzlies by 3 in Game 4 in order to take the 3-1 series lead. The Grizzlies would win their second game of the series in Game 5, as they beat the Warriors by 39 points in Memphis, as of course that was the game where they were playing Whoop That Trick. And then in Game 6, they would go on to beat the Grizzlies in San Francisco by 14 points. And in this clinching game, Game 6, the Warriors would be led in scoring by their elite starting shooting guard, Klay Thompson. He finished with 30 points and 8 rebounds, as well as 3 blocks in the 42 minutes he played, as he shot 8 for 14 from 3. Their go-to starting point guard, Stephen Curry, finished with 29 points, 7 rebounds, and 5 assists for the game. Andrew Wiggins, their all-star starting small forward, finished with 18 points and 11 rebounds, as well as 3 blocks. Their all-star starting power forward, Draymond Green, finished with 14 points, 15 rebounds, and 8 assists, as all of the major Warriors really kind of came together to put themselves over the Grizzlies and show why they're a team that deserves to make it to this round. So that is how all 4 of these teams got here. And then looking at how this matchup is going to play out, the Golden State Warriors are set to face off against the Dallas Mavericks, and the Warriors have home court advantage. So if I were to really predict how these series would go, I would think that the Celtics' height would give them advantage, and I would probably guess that the Warriors' depth and experience would give them the advantage. But of course, congratulations to all 4 of these teams, as I can't wait to see how this matchup shapes out, and the 2 winners from these matchups will determine who will take home the trophy at the end of the season. And I can't wait to see how that goes. And with that said, I want to thank everyone for listening to all 19 minutes of this piece. And once again, today is Tuesday, May 17th. Once all of today's exhibitions and matchups are done, I'm going to come back tomorrow. But I want to thank everyone for sticking through me as I've been navigating through this world of sports one day at a time. Thanks once again for listening. I hope all is well, and I'll catch you with more tomorrow. Thanks for listening to my piece. Peace out.